Some play Warhammer 40k for enjoyment of the hobby, lore, or gameplay, but this is more a guide for people who are interested in none of those things. Time to crush some dreams and make a big name for yourself with my updated 10th edition version of the That Guy Guide to play Warhammer 40k. First up, if you really want to make a big impact on the Warhammer 40k scene, you're going to need an army to play games with. Without an army to play the game with, you'd be merely relegated to sidling up to other games of Warhammer and offering vicarious advice and lewd jokes uninvited. For choosing a faction, you should probably pick an army that you low-key hate the look and feel of the models for, but is currently considered overpowered in some way. Provided they have the best numbers on the internet, they're probably going to do fine. No need to bother looking into the nuances and how you play with them. You should then take a look at the latest big tournament that army won, buy that entire exact army list in one go. Splash $1,500 on a Flavour of the Month army list to win if you want to. Sometimes you just can't skimp on pay to win. I wouldn't worry too much about just creating yourself an entire pile of grey plastic that you lose motivation to get round to finishing. The intention was only ever to assemble like 80% of it anyway. No one really cares if you've got a few guns missing or snapped off. All the better to confuse the enemy with phalanxes of warriors without heads or arms. From there, proceed straight to play. Painting is usually for other people. If you absolutely must, then maybe dip them in contrast to get your battle ready points. So if your local gaming group is good-natured enough, you could just throw a hissy fit whenever someone tries to deny you those 10 points for being painted. When you do assemble your models, you can do so tactically. The masterful strategy begins before the game's even begun after all. If a character has a rather large powerful aura ability, you might as well find a really nice big scenic base for him to make it go as far as possible. If the model's problematically tall but you want to hide it behind terrain so you can't get shot, maybe just break off all the tall bits, or you could even go as far to model them lying down. It makes perfect sense for your troopers to take cover after all. Once you've got an army together, it's time to prepare for a game, and as ever with Warhammer 40k it's important to have that pre-game discussion about expectations for the game, the objective being to make sure that your opponent is fully prepared for a casual narrative game. Tell them that you're new and bringing a fluffy narrative list, and then proceed to forge that narrative hard for the most broken combo in competitive 40k right now. I'm sure you can think of a backstory for having 6 Catan in your army list if you try hard enough. If you happen to know what your opponent's going to be playing, it's only natural that your forces would be trying to take down the foe with the most appropriate weaponry, and even better if they happen to actually send you their army list before the game even begins. It does make complete lore sense that if your force was happening to go against some Imperial or Chaos Knights, you bring nothing but anti-tank guns, or if you know you're playing against Space Marines, you may as well have every single plasma gun that your army has to offer in the list. A quick game's a good game after all, particularly if your opponent's tabled by the end of turn 2. When drawing up your army list, it's generally accepted that you can go like 50 or 100 points over and no one will really care too much. We're playing Warhammer, not doing accounting after all, and to better help with that, there's no real reason to bring any army list to the battle. Just try and ad-lib remember as best as you can, or maybe write it in pencil on the back of a literal crisp packet. If you happen to be playing a small game of Warhammer like 1,000 points or less, you could try some surprise moves. Always exciting to see how many Primarch or Nightclass models you can fit in an 1,000 point game or less. If being a Games Workshop web store whale doesn't appeal to you, or you find yourself caught short and you don't happen to have the current top meta unit for your army, then you can always proxy, of course. Another chance to deploy a few Alpha Legion tactics here. Put 5 Intercessor squads down on the board, have them all counter slightly different types of Space Marine. Breeze through telling your opponent what they are at the start of the game in like 5 seconds, and of course definitely have one that are the actual Intercessors as well, just to add that little bit of extra spice to catch people out. Above all though, the most important preparation that you can get for a game of Warhammer 40k is to not shower for the previous 72 hours before the game begins. There's no reason to give your foe the advantage of clean air, and if you happen to be playing Nurgle, then of course you're just playing lore appropriate. From there you can arrange a time for the game, arrive around about half an hour after that time to signal that you're in a position of power and the true alpha male in this gaming situation. On the way over to the hobby store, it's worth making sure that you're well supplied. You need to keep your energy levels up if you're going to be playing your best. Make sure that you have some food on hand. Ideally some Cheetos or crisps are pretty good, but you do need to make sure that you lick most of the dust and grease off before picking up the most nicely painted centerpiece model that your opponent has. Taking basic measures like this is only polite, as you suddenly and unexpectedly pick up and examine their army. Getting into the game itself, and you need to set up the table following the normal rules for the mission. Generally speaking, if you've got a gunline army, then it probably makes sense to play Hammer and Anvil deployment on planet Bowling Ball. Maybe throw in a couple of small shed-sized ruins somewhere in the middle of the board and call it done on a terrain point of view. On the other hand though, if you're playing heavy melee and murderous close combat, why not try a bit of a city fight in a dense urban environment with some narrow streets? That'll test out the opponent's firepower commands. It'd be a bit easy for them if they could shoot your army from greater than 12 inches away. Prior to the game, it's worth talking through and explaining your army lists. This is a good opportunity to trash talk the opponent's choices or complain about how overpowered their faction is, maybe at the same time if you're feeling ambitious. There's plenty of other things to discuss at this point. Feel free to throw out a bit of faction hate as well. Tell your opponent how Titanic Knights just don't really belong in mainstream 40k in general, how Tau are all boring gunline players, and the Space Marines are generic and for noobs. Proceed to draw through your own army list, not giving your opponent any information about your army or its capabilities, and certainly deny the existence of certain stratagems when directly asked. That'll help better surprise them later. When battle is joined and the game kicks off, as a guiding principle, remember that winning in Warhammer 40k is absolutely everything. The winner of the game is just all around a stronger person and a better man, and you kind of want to minimise anything that distracts from this. Friendly conversation definitely wouldn't help, so you might want to respond in monosyllables until your opponent gets the gist there. Though I guess if you absolutely have to talk about something, you might as well bring up some real world politics. I'm sure you can find a way to crowbar in some big issue from the culture wars and just really pick a side and stick to it. When moving your models, be generous. The way to move a miniature is to measure the movement distance from the front of the model and then to put the back of that model at the end of that distance, and all of your miniatures will always be able to move that maximal distance. Monsters and vehicles can go straight through terrain and ruins. Some people like to measure whether or not the entirety of a base can fit round a ruin wall, but that's probably a bit boring and takes too much time. When rolling dice, you'll find that some of them are cocked. They might not be 100% flat to the table, or the result might not really be quite as clear as you'd like. You can re-roll those, but only if you don't like the results. Feel free to switch up your policy mid-game several times over. Another common tactic in Warhammer 40k is to roll your dice behind a big bit of terrain over on your side of the table. That way, who knows exactly how many dice you're picking up. A clever trick can be to gain an extra wound roll if you pick up one extra missed hit each time a unit attacks. That should add up to quite a bit of damage over the course of a game. Of course, the rolls aren't always going to go your way. You should get pretty visibly angry if you ever roll an unlucky result. It is a dice game after all, and dice are supposed to roll average or better pretty much every time. That's just how maths works. The rules of Warhammer 40k can be fairly deep and complicated. Occasionally things are going to come up where the exact outcome isn't just perfectly obvious. When something like this happens, it's important that you win every rules dispute. Each one is a potential swing in the game. All you need is an absolute iron and unbreaking will to refuse to cede any ground, and just make it clear that you consider that your opponent's hard cheating if they deviate at all from your interpretation. It can be easier to get your way on your own rules if you don't bring your codex along to the game. That way the way that one thing is going to be played is going to be down to your determination and little else. Occasionally though, if you really can't make any headway, you could agree to roll off with your opponent to determine which way it's played. It's probably worth having a weighted dice along for that occasion. After all, that's not really cheating if you know you're right. As well as unclear rules, occasionally you might have gotcha moments in 40k, where one player is surprised by rules they didn't know that the other force had. It's a mark of your own superior intellect when your enemy falls foul of this, and you could get yourself a nice double advantage if they've already let you off a similar thing earlier in the game. Another fun one could be if your opponent forgets to declare a command ability or to move an important unit and then moves on to the shooting phase, then it's absolutely no more movement allowed for them. As Napoleon Bonaparte once said, never interrupt an enemy when he is making a mistake. I'm sure that they'll be super impressed if you can quote that to them verbatim after they've fallen foul of a particularly painful gotcha moment. Perhaps the most important thing in Warhammer 40k is playing the mission as opposed to just getting too carried away by dealing damage to enemy units. Ideally you should be that guy who keeps score for your opponent and you. It's only polite to after all. And as you're totting up the results for each round, make sure you only add on any secondary objective points for your opponent if prompted to on multiple occasions. I'm sure some things will wind up getting counted, but who's really going to notice if you don't score their objectives properly early in the game? Perhaps the ultimate Sigma male move in Warhammer 40k though is if your opponent ever needs to take a bathroom break. This can be an absolute critical moment in the game that you should embrace to the maximum advantage. In the 2 minutes or so that they've gone, a lot can change on the board. All your units can move forward a little. If it's your movement phase, all advances get a free 6. If enemy units were carefully positioned so they were obscured, you might as well nudge a model just out round the edge of the ruined terrain. And if there's still time after that, take a look at the top of your secondary deck to organise the nicest ones on top, replenish a few of your slain models, and count down a wound on any of your opponent's wound trackers. Be all ready when they return to nonchalantly take the game up once more. Occasionally, despite all your best efforts, Warhammer games might still go badly. If you happen to be losing or even just not winning quite as easily as you'd like, make your displeasure felt, strike up an aggressive discussion about Games Workshop's balance, accuse your opponent of being a win-at-all-costs tryhard, and you could even consider some pro moves like conceding at the end of Battle Round 1 and storming out in a fit of rage if the dice have gone against your favour, bonus points for a classy table flip, or actually binning your army on the way out. The other and more subtle approach to a game gone bad might be to make like the Necron Chronomancers and manipulate the time. Most of the time in Warhammer 40k, it should be perfectly possible to ensure that the game just does not end. You can play progressively slower and slower until your opponent loses all interest after 5 hours halfway through your turn 3, and eventually gives up the ghost in the face of you rolling your saves one by one individually, or taking 20 minutes to guess and second guess and reposition your models in the movement phase over and over again in a situation that's clearly hopeless. For a quicker fix, just feign getting a phone call and suddenly say that you've got to be somewhere elsewhere very quickly, and you're sorry but you'll just have to call it a draw this time. If your grey painted and partially assembled dream team is getting the results it deserves though, then make sure that you give yourself a pat on the back and celebrate your success vocally. This is a really nice opportunity to explain at length how great you are at model soldiers, and how clever you've been as your tournament murder force takes apart their fluffy narrative list. Ideally, you don't want your opponent to be conceding under any circumstances. You really want to savour the victory and take apart their last few units as slowly and painfully as possible. Winning is the name of the game after all, and you want to make it last and savour the victory. With great training for these principles, you might beat everyone you know exactly once with these tactics, though after that you might start to find fewer and fewer opponents out there, potential opponents in the gaming group, far too in awe of you to dare challenge a master. Once you've finally reached the point where no one responds to your messages on the WhatsApp group to ask if anyone's interested in a game for multiple weeks running, you can basically declare that you have won, and from then on it's your prerogative to lurk around the local hobby store, offering games to newer players that just picked up the Tyranid half of Leviathan, and proceeds to club those baby seals into the ground with your optimised tournament cheese. Many aspiring that guys might peak at this level, but I'd remember that Warhammer 40k is a big hobby with great scope. Some people might like to try and test their mettle at a tournament, and I'd bear in mind that this is pretty high level stuff. You're going to need to be a very big fish indeed if you dare to leave your small pond. It's far harder to get called out if you're playing the newbies who don't know Warhammer well, so your subtle nudges to guide the game to victory must be subtle. But with the right combination of plausibly deniable errors, gaslighting and dodgy dice, you could make it to the top of a big event and almost bow down to your glory. Fingers crossed you can make your escape with a paper certificate and a combat patrol box, and then retreat back to the local gaming store as the internet responds to you getting caught cheating on stream in 12 different ways. You get post-event disqualified, banned from future events, and Reddit bays for your blood. There's no higher achievement in the world of Warhammer than this. So anyway, I think that just about rounds it up. I'm always glad to do my bit in service to the Warhammer hobby, and I look forward to hearing any of yours or others' exploits down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k guides coming, maybe none quite on the same standard as this, but there might be a few more normal tactics and news videos. If you've enjoyed the video or others like them, then feel free to support on the channel's Patreon page. I'll leave that link down in the video description, and otherwise an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.